Good morning. My name is Jody, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CAPLEX CA2E Global User Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I would now like to turn the conference over to Ms. Anne-Marie Arnvik. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webcast. Today, Rory is going to tell us about 2E and give us the updates. So I'm looking forward to that. And just before he starts, I would like to just take a moment to talk about some of the other activities we have coming up. The next webcast we have was going to be in end January or start February. It's going to be a Websidian webcast, and we're going to present to you the features we have put into Websidian with the RIA applications with extended JS. So what we're going to do is we will develop some small functionality, a small application Plex, and we will show you how to deploy this in Websidian, and then also get this good look and feel of the rich internet applications, and add it all to this small application for you to see. So it's sort of the basics of how to go about it, how to do it. And when we have done that, we're going to take you through some of the more sophisticated features as well in the product. So we're hoping that you'll stay tuned for the date for that. It's going to be in the new year. So that's one of the activities we have. The next webcast we're looking for is a partner webcast, or we're looking to is a partner webcast in March or April. Where one of our the Websidian's partners is going to do show you some really neat stuff. I haven't had a confirmed date for this yet, so I'm not going to reveal any more. But stay tuned for that as well, and look out. We have a great, interesting program coming up. To the user group meetings, we had a user group meeting in Germany here in October. There was a user group meeting in March in Sweden. And now we have the Finnish user group meeting coming up, and that's going to be Helsinki on January 24th. So if you're in the area, of course, it does require some Finnish skills, but otherwise, there's going to be presentation in English as well. So look out for the user group meetings in your area. And if you would like to host a user group meeting, let us know if you want some assistance with putting together a program or having us come over, present either live or by remote access. Just email me at support@websidian.com, and we'll work something out, and we'll set up a meeting for you. We're also planning and going ahead with planning of the conference in 2013 in November in the New York area. Unfortunately, we are not doesn't have a date yet, but it's just being finalized. So we have the date, we have the venue ready. So stay tuned for that as well. I think that's it for now for the activities. Regarding the forums, if you haven't joined them yet, please do so. It's a great way to stay tuned and get some of the information and a lot of the communications and the dialogue with your friends and colleagues out there. And if you have any questions around the community, just drop me an email at support@websidian.com and just write it for Anne-Marie or whatever you feel like, and I'll get it. So that's it for the activities, the forums, the community activities. So, Rory, over to you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you will see the slides that I'm showing now.
Rory, we don't see your slides.
Really?
You need to click on content.
I had content up, and for some reason it...
Click on the first item in content.
Oh, we're back again. Oh, that's what's going on, because it's showing the original... Close that and say... Right, are you now seeing my PowerPoint slides? My apologies for that. I apologize for the late start. This is entirely my fault. A couple of quick notes about the work that Anne-Marie and Christoph Heinrich at CM First are doing. Obviously, the only upcoming webcast there is a Websidian, which was very useful to many Plex users, less so to those companies that are only using 2E, but we are obviously hoping to do a number of 2E webcasts as well. One thing is since the short time since Anne-Marie and Christoph have taken over as looking after user groups, we've started having a lot of webcasts, and so this is obviously a good sign that we'll be having more in the future, which will be of interest to all audiences. I'd also like to make my own personal plea, which is that after having had user group meetings in Sweden in March, Germany in October, and Finland in January coming up, I would love to be able to go to a user conference in, let's say, southern Italy, Spain maybe sometime in June. So if anybody can, if we could organise something like that, somewhere nice and warm, I would certainly appreciate it. Having got that over, but thank you very much, Anne-Marie, for all the work that you are doing, taking over as coordinating all these user groups and your work on behalf of the TUI and the Plex community.
You're welcome.
The next point I'd like to talk about will be is talk about our new product manager, Paddy, who I believe is Paddy on the line?
Yes, I am.
Right. Well, Paddy, I will now hand over to you for a slide, and you can explain your role and what you'll be doing for the community.
Okay. Thank you, Rory. Welcome, everyone. For those folks that are on the line that I have not spoken with already, I look forward to working with you. I came on board a few months ago. One of my responsibilities is, in fact, the product manager for 2E Plex. I also have the CHM product. One of the short-term items that we performed was providing feedback on the roadmap. The user community forum was used to, in fact, have voting on some of those items that we're looking for in the next releases of both 2E and Plex. And actually, we are finalizing the releases this week based on some of that feedback. And what will be happening is the roadmaps that are normally located in the support website will then, in fact, be updated to review, include the features that are slotted for the future release. One of the other items I want to do then is go back into the ideas area of the community, because there are still some items that will need to then get moved to, or actually planned, so that when you do go out there and submit additional items, you will be able to clearly see what's updated and what is not. Another item I do want to address, and we'll be having a future webcast on that, is I would like to optimize the voting process for features. The community forum was used. There was a little bit of confusion in how that voting worked, so we'll try to rectify that. And finally, I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here, and I look forward to reaching out and getting to know more of our customers and partners. Like I've said, I've had a few conversations with some, and I definitely want to keep those communications going. I actually am located in the New Jersey office of CA Technologies. My reach information is on the screen. Please, I look forward to any kind of feedback that you can provide. I think there's a ton of opportunity here in the 2E Plex arena with the IBM I hardware, as well as in the Plex arena. So I look forward to working with everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Paddy. I appreciate it. And I know that those customers that you've already spoken to directly are very appreciative of having a product manager who's involved and frankly so keen. So again, thank you. So to all of our participants, so I'm now going to start discussing about release 8.6. I'll do a little brief overview of release 8.5, the feature that came out from that, when that came out, and then we'll look at the features of 8.6 in some detail. This is a fairly technical presentation, but by the end of it, those of you who haven't already upgraded will, I think, have a good reason for upgrading to see all the new features. Briefly about me, for those that don't know, I'm the software architect of the TUI team. I've been working for Sign-On and then for Sterling and then for CA, but all the time with the TUI team for the last 15 years. And then in the UK, hence my strange accent, I was actually using TUI for 3 years prior to that. During that time, I came on board around about release 6.2. No doubt many of you have been using TUI for significantly before that. I think the first release I ever used was about release 4, back when it really was Sign-On. And since I started, obviously over that period of time, from 6.2 in the late 90s to 8.6 now, then I've been deeply involved in some of the big features, the brand new RPG4 generator, the function wrapping, parameters, triggers, some bits and pieces in there. A bit about me personally. I live actually in San Francisco, which is where the original development team is. We're actually based in Larkspur Landing, just outside San Francisco. And I still live in San Francisco, work at the San Francisco office. But as you can see, I do a bunch of stuff outside the office. And the bottom line, British hence the strange accent, is because typically I do presentations to American audiences. And so I have to explain that even though CA is an American company, and typically the presentation will be to Americans, my accent is not American. So here's just a brief slide about, this was taken from Paddy's roadmap presentation about the strategy that we have within the TUI team. And I'll talk a little bit about the agile development in a second, and how that's affected us as a TUI team and the benefits it's provided in terms of, certainly recently, how we brought out release 8.6. But as users, you are all aware, up on the top right there, that one of the reasons why TUI is so successful, and one reason I assume why you all chose it, is for things like its reliability, its stability, the fact that it's always backwards compatible, and when you get to a new release, everything you had before it just works, and you have new features, unlike perhaps I could say things like Oracle or other operating systems like that, which have their own quirks. As Paddy said, she's looking to improve the voting methods, because as we found from about release 8.5 onwards, one of the best ways to get new features added that customers really want is by working with the customers pretty closely, often to provide some kind of voting mechanism, so we can find out what customers really want in terms of new features, in terms of things which matter to them. And then also at the same time, we're looking to extend the reach of TUI, most obviously with the web option add-on product. There'll be a little bit about that. But then also within release 8.6, we brought out some web service functionality, and then we're looking at doing some XML-related functionality in the next release. So I'll briefly go over 8.5 now, and then I'll discuss the agile development and 8.6 and the features. So 8.5 came out in 2009, so it's now 3 years old. As I say, a major release. 8.5 was a long time in the making. It had a lot of new features. It was a big effort by the TUI team. The previous release had been 8.1 with a service pack. It's now the most common release in use by far by our TUI customer base. If any of you are not currently at release 8.5, that is, if you're below 8.5, so if you're back at 8.0, 8.1, 8.1.2, I spoke to a customer yesterday who had who had a 6.2 installation they wanted to upgrade. 8.5 is well worth having. It's a very stable release now. We put out a service pack to it fairly soon after it came out, which added new functionality. Some of the major features which it had service program support. Back in release 7.0 plus and then 8.1, we started with the ILE support, being able to create bound RPG programs and create modules. And then in release 8.5, we had our service program support, so you could take any modules, be they from 2E, generating 2E, or external ones, you could bind them into a service program, which we would generate from the model, and then we effectively compile a source member into a service program. Even though a service program isn't technically a compiled object, we would effectively have a single source member which would contain everything you need to be able to create this service program. Obviously, being integrated with the 2E environment, then you have all those, the documentation, the impact analysis, change management, all of that functionality is just built into it as part of this. And it was actually such a successful feature that we have a lot of customers who are using it as almost as a placeholder for their own external non-2E service programs. We also started with web service support in 8.5, creating a web service which can be called from outside the 2E model. So we do all the processing to generate a WSDL interface, create the actual web service function itself, which at that point is a procedure within a service program. And then we include all the runtime processing required, including a number of commands which you can use to actually instantiate your web service, start the web service, all that stuff. Those are some of the big features that's just a couple of the big features we put into 8.5. So 8.6 is the latest release. This is what you're all here for. So this came out in April last year, April this year, so about 6 months ago or so. One big marquee feature, which I'll go into a lot of detail, plus some of the smaller features, plus lots of bug fixes. The second line here may not seem that important in terms of those of you who are saying, I want to know what the new features are. But the fact is that we used Agile as a means of developing this release. And for those of you that may have used it or may know a little bit about it, the biggest single difference is that rather than us within the 2E development team putting a bunch of features in there, very good features no doubt, writing them all, coding them all, and then passing it off to QA, QA would test them all, and then passing it to customers after 6 months, a year, year and a half, however long it would take. We said, okay, the process will be that every month, actually every 4 weeks, we would release something to the customers who are involved in the program, so effectively beta customers. So every month we would have a conference call and we'd say, okay, here is the latest either new feature or partial new feature, which you can test out and take a look at. And obviously in some cases those changes might only be changes to screens and things, but we gave everyone the opportunity throughout the entire development process, which was approximately a year, not including the beta at the end, to have input and say, I like the look of this, I don't like the look of that. And this came right down to those customers being able to say, yeah, where you've placed the text here at the bottom of the screen doesn't quite work for me, or do you think you could change the wording on some of these command keys to be slightly different? This level of input for those little things, combined with the big things, we like the way this function is going, means that on an ongoing basis, over the course of that year, we were able to constantly refine it. It also meant that effectively we had this roughly a year of developing the product, and then a beta period of, I believe it was 2 to 3 months, when we opened it up to a much wider beta to a lot of customers. It meant that once we released it, we've had very, very little in the way of negative customer feedback. Either, as we sometimes get, I don't like some of this new stuff, or more importantly, we've had very, very few customers reporting any kind of bugs, because a lot of these bugs which might otherwise have been picked up as soon as we went GA were picked up during the development process. So we are looking to use Agile on going forward. We're one of the first big projects within CA to use Agile, big development projects. And Plex is now using it as well. So for those of you that are Plex customers, that's the way that the next, well, this most recent release I think will be done, and the next release is going to be done. If any of you out there have not been beta customers, or in the past, or were not involved in the Agile development of Release 8.6, I can thoroughly recommend that you contact Paddy and ask to be involved. There is some commitment on your part that over the course of this year, a few times at least, you will download the latest version and try out the new features. But the benefit is you get to see those new features early, and also you get input on how the product is built, how it works, and to a certain extent, how new features will be implemented. So that was how we did Release 8.6. It's available for V5R4 onwards. I'm trusting that all of you customers are at least at V5R4 or above. Obviously, it runs on any release V5R4 or above, so V5R4, 6.1, 7.1, and obviously as any new releases come up, then we get to test our software on effectively a pre-release version of whatever the new operating system is. So we're assuming it's going to work on 8.0 or whatever the next release is that that IBM calls the operating system for the IBM i. So what do we do in Release 8.6? This is the meat of it. The marquee feature is called Enhanced Array Support. We refer to EAS. And what is it? It's quite simple. It's result sets. It's our way to pass the result set into a function as a parameter, or as a set of parameters into a function, and then potentially pass them back out again. It's obviously key to developing web services. A lot of people who've written web services do that. A typical thing is you call from a web service and say, I want to get every record which matches X criteria, and the web service will then go away the back end and call a program to get that. Now, the communications bottleneck there is a real problem. The fact that typically when you're doing any kind of communication across the web, then the hold-up is between, your computer and the computer at the far end. What it's doing is then having to potentially call other processes, and those other processes, all this communication stuff going back and forth, is the problem. The problem is not the actual, the RPG program getting the record. It's getting all those records, record back out to the web. So obviously, if you can limit that by having a single call rather than multiple calls, you're a lot better off. This kind of functionality, most web type languages can do it, so we said we have to do it. And actually, we have a number of TUI customers who've taken generated code for, let's say, an execute external function, which they might use for a web service or something like that, and they've effectively hacked their own generated code to do this. And it was partly a result of their success that we said, oh, this is going to be relatively easy to do. So for those of you that don't use a lot of sort of web stuff, I'll go into some detail. Here is typically when you pass a record parameter. This little box in the middle here shows the record format. You've got 1 field, 2 fields, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 fields in this record format. And so when you pass this record from program 1 to program 2, it passes a single parameter. As you know, TUI functions can maximum 9 parameters, so it's passing this single parameter, which may contain a number of fields. And each of those fields could be, some could be input, some could be out, both, neither. That's how a record parameter is typically passed. Now, if you define that record parameter either as a record parameter or as an array interface, the original pre-8.6 version, yes, you can pass multiple fields at once as one parameter because you just add them to, let's say, an array structure, and you pass that array structure back and forth. It's how we pass information for retrieve objects. And then it's simple to take your retrieve object, stick it inside an execute external function, and now you can call that from your non-TUI programs. For instance, web services. But it's still just retrieving one record. You still typically pass in one key value. It will load up that record format with the information for that key and return it. And so if you need to get 100 records, you've got to call that execute external function 100 times. What do we have in enhanced array support? We say, okay, we can now, as a single parameter, because we only have 9 parameters to play with, we can pass effectively any number of instances of that array structure, so any number of elements of that array, and each element is a structure in its own right. So it's only one parameter. You still have 8 other parameters to play with. It's defined as a 2E array. You've all got arrays. You all may have use arrays to create structures, so you can create any kind of structure here, which includes any number of fields, and say, I've defined this array as having 100 elements. Okay, you can now pass this array with 100 elements of this array as a single parameter. If you define your array with 9,999 elements, you can pass a 9,999 element array as a single parameter, and you still have 8 more parameters to mess around with. In this case, of course, the difference from the first way is that you're only calling program 2 once. From program 1, you say, okay, maybe it's one parameter. You say, here is the criteria, the key criteria, and then return me back another parameter, which is this array, return every record which matches that key, that partial key. As we say, it can process up to 9,999 records at once. So it can return up to almost 10,000 records. And initially, this functionality is available only for execute external function and execute user program. And that's due to some limitations that we originally set on this functionality. We are looking at adding this functionality to other functions, but when we brought it out, we wanted to limit ourselves to see how well it worked. And these seem to be the most obvious ways to do it. If you're going to do something like web services, or indeed any processing where you're calling a 2E function from outside the 2E model, then these two function types are the two you'd be most likely to be working with. So some limitations or criteria, and bear in mind, I'll show you some examples of this in action. You have to use an array. We designed this entire processing around 2E's array support. So you can't simply say, return me 1,000 records from the order detail file. You have to define an array in your model, which is itself based over the order detail file. But once you've done that, you're fine. The number of instances, I said you could return 2, 100, 9,999. It's purely down to how the array itself is defined. When you create a new array, they default saying 100 instances, and that's the default, but you can play with it as much as you want. And another, I guess it's a limitation, is that you're returning all the fields in this array element. So if you have an array which is based over the order details file, then you'd have to return or at least pass all the fields in the array. This isn't a huge limitation. We're just not allowing dropped fields. But of course, you don't need to process those fields. This is just the information that goes back and forth. But if all the fields do have the same usage, you'll see some significant performance improvements. What I'm saying here probably doesn't make a lot of sense in the context of this webcast, because you don't know the functionality. But one thing we did here is we have a huge amount of information, both in the manuals about, hey, how does this new functionality work, and also in the on the support site, we have a rather long presentation. In fact, it's sort of one presentation so long it's split into 2 halves, showing an example of how the new enhanced array support works. You can actually go through and follow through this scenario, creating it in your model, and then see the process working, see how this example goes together, and you can watch it working. So here I'm going to show you some example screens just so you get an idea of, oh, this is the kind of processing there is. So it won't be a full demo. So in this case here, I've defined a product array. I've called it product array. it has the default number of elements, 100 elements, and I've simply defined it the exact same as the retrieval index on the product file. I defined it using the same keys and everything. And then here I've said, okay, I'm going to call a program, and then to this program called program, I've simply said, okay, I'm passing two parameters. The first one's just a field. It's the product code. It's the key here. It's a partial key. And the second one here, you can see I've said, okay, I'm going to pass the product array based over the arrays file, pass it as a record, and then this section over here on the right-hand side, a little A, column header, mat, that's the functionality which, as you can see at the bottom, it says, do you want to pass this as an array, i.e. not simply as a record structure, but as a full set of array elements as a result set. And if you did a Z onto that second parameter there, you would see that rather than saying up here on the top right, passed as record or passed as field, we now say, okay, it's passed as an array with 100 elements. And that information is just taken straight from the array definition. So that's the only difference you would see in terms of looking at the parameter details. Now, when you're passing this into a function, it's a single parameter. You can't mess around with the individual fields within that. We have a new context, array context, very like the work context. And also you can, if you pass it into one program and this array into one program and then pass through to another program and to another program, you can use the parameter context for that. It's a very simple interface. We didn't want to make too many changes to the way things work. We want to make it simple to understand. So in this case, from my calling program, I'm calling that other called program, the one that I defined with those two parameters, and we have this field, first parameter, the product code, and the second I'm just saying, okay, pass through the product array. The only thing you can change is the context. If parameter context is available, you can write in par, otherwise ARR, array is the only context. Now you might be saying, okay, so now I'm passing this information through, but what can I do with it? I mean, I can't, you know, it's a result set. So we said, okay, well, how can you then work with the individual fields within that, within each element of that array? Bear in mind, there are 100 elements, let's say, in that array, and each of those elements contains, you know, a product code field, a product text field, a product description field, a product price field. How do I work with the individual fields in there? Well, we looked at changing the move function, but it was much, much too complex for that. Because there's lots more information required that you need to do, then we couldn't just take an existing built-in function. So we said, okay, we're going to create this new star move array function, which, as I said, you can do any of effectively three things. You can move a field, let's say a work field, into one of the fields within one of the individual elements within the array, or you can do the reverse. You can move, let's say, the product code field in the third element of this array into, you know, the local product code, and then you can deal with that field in that context much as you would do with any other field. Or you can move one field from one array into another subfield, another array. Obviously, all the same field validations move, you know, all the different conversions from numeric to character, things like that. What does this look like, this new move array function? I have a few screens to show you. Obviously, there are three things we need to know. Normally, there's only two things we ever need to know about a field. We say, what's the context and what's the field? I'm looking at local.product code. Here, we need to say, I need the product code field from what array, the product array, and which particular element. The third element, the 17th element, the 100th element. So we need to, and the syntax we chose is right here, from the product array at, you know, the element number is whatever number here, the work.line number. We want the product price. So we want to know what is the product price in the third element, work.line number element of the product array. as an example, this is what the move array looks like. As you can see, we actually have 6 individual fields. Like the move function, the first, where the move has the output field and the input field, here we have 3 output and 3 input. So here what we're saying is, okay, move the work.currentPrice field into the product price field in the product array in the that element, the work.currentLine element of the array. If work.currentLine has a value of 4, then we're saying, okay, move the work.currentPrice field into the product price subfield of the 4th element of the product array. Likewise, we can say here we're going to move that product price in the 4th element of product array into the work.currentPrice field, and then subsequently we can play with that field as much as we want because it's just a work field now. We've moved the value into that work field, and then you can use any other TUI built-in function on there. You can call other functions with that value however you want. And you can move one field, the bulk discount price from the bulk items array at maybe work.input line is the value 7, from the 7th element of that bulk items array into the product price subfield in the 4th element of the product array. So you can move the values of fields around from array to array, from a standalone field in something like a work context or a local context or whatever, into an array, and vice versa. You can also say, okay, let's take all the fields in an array element and let's move them into the work context, the local context, or whatever. And we just copy these fields, every field into that in one quick move. So rather than to move all the fields individually, you can move all the fields from this array record into, let's say, the work context, and then you can play with them there or pass them to other functions which don't have array support, array parameter support. Obviously, the work and local, because every field is available in those contexts in the model, then you can move everything into work context. And then every time the function is changed, if either the source of the target array has been changed, then the generator will use the latest definition. So you don't need to go in and say, oh, wait, we're not moving this extra field in because we forgot about it. It will just move more than that. Rather like a star move all will move fields in a move fields from, let's say, a DB1 to a par context and a retrieve object. So, and a quick example here says, okay, I want to move all the fields in the item array, the first element of the item array, onto all the fields from that into the same matching field names if they exist in the product array at whatever index number work line number is. If there are any non-matching fields, they don't get copied over. So any fields which exist in the product array but don't exist in the item array aren't touched. Maybe you've already loaded values into those. And any fields which appear in the item array, the input array, but don't appear in the product array in this case, just don't get moved across. There is no match there. In terms of the actual generation, in RPG, these parameter generators multiple occurrence data structures, mods. They're not true arrays. The reason we did this was because it meant there were very few changes required to our underlying generation programs. We're currently passing data structures back and forth. The ease with which we can do this is made it very simple to implement. We do all the low-level stuff. In COBOL, if any of you are COBOL shops, we actually generate them as proper arrays. It's quite a lot more complex than RPG, but because of some of the nicer things in some ways about COBOL, and it's very rare I talk about nice things in COBOL, the initialization is actually better. The source code for either of them is not particularly nice. You don't want to look at source code. Nobody should ever look at generated source code. As you know, if you've ever talked to anyone who doesn't like TUI and has looked at the source code, they hate it, so don't do it. Obviously, and this is something that sometimes our customers may not be aware of, when you make a change, there are huge lots of areas in the product that you wouldn't normally think about. You would say, oh, with something like this, all of the model needs to be checked. Obvious things like wide cover model hopping between models, the impact analysis. But then things like scanning for errors and action diagrams, wrappering functions with a huge bit of processing, and then some things like the ychook-funx command, the one that checks whether or not action diagrams in your model are working correctly. All of that kind of processing needs to be updated and looked at to say, okay, are there any changes whatsoever that could affect any of this processing? Other TOE features. We updated the splash screen. Not really a huge deal. It's a new splash screen. As you know, the splash screen is the one that just pops up just for a second or so when the TOE model is being loaded. If you have a fast machine, you barely see it. If you have a slow 520 or a 170 or something, it may be up there for a few seconds. But by default now, when we ship TOE out to new customers, that screen will pause. The first time you go in there, that screen will actually pause, and you can have a look at that screen and say, oh, and there is now a command key you can press from the splash screen, rather as you might see on PC software, like an About button. We now say, okay, when the splash screen is up, you can press F6, let's pause, and you can see, by default, we display a list of all the fixes, effectively the release documents for that release. So it will show a list of all the fixes that are in there. So it's a way to let you know what we've done. You can then turn it off, so it goes back to the way it used to be, where it doesn't pause on that screen. But because it's totally user configurable, you can, for instance, in your shop say, okay, maybe we've made a change to some other feature on the system. Let me just set that flag back to 0, and all my developers, when they go in there and start using TOE model, effectively, they will get this. So as you know, most of the time this screen just comes up and disappears. Right now what happens is that this will pop up, and if you have the flag on it to saying, yes, pause, it'll pause like this. And you can either press Enter to keep going, or as it says here, you press F6. The text here in red is entirely user configurable, and what it actually does if you press F6 is it runs a command string that's held in one of the messages in the model, which then does some processing. By default, it starts SEU to show a text file of all the fixes that are in there, but you can then, if you want, change it to do something else. An example might be if you have a number of fixes on your system, a number of PTFs that you have applied, then you could say, you could change this configure yourself to say, okay, display all the PTFs in the system. And you could call a program of yours. You could say, press F6 to see current stock price, and you could have some program which runs which shows you your company's current stock price. It's all configurable. Most of you, my guess would be, will just turn this processing off once you've had a look at it, because otherwise there is an extra step to type, Y2, this pops up, and then press Enter again. Some other features, in addition to the splash screen there. We created a new command, ychook-funpar. This was spearheaded by my colleague Simon, to look at any existing functions to look for parameter mismatches. And this is effectively any kind of parameter mismatch there might be. So it looks in the parameter files and the action diagram files, and looks at ways where maybe one thing has been changed but not another. Obviously very powerful for the new enhanced array support, because we may be passing different kinds of parameters. But also, CA support does get quite a few calls from customers who have issues, which get tracked down fairly quickly to, oh yes, it looks like you made a change in a calling program, but not in the calls program, or actually more frequent in the call program and not in the calling programs. And now, as part of your regular model cleanup, because you all do regular model cleanup, don't you? We have this extra command you can run to say, okay, check function parameters at the same time that you're checking action diagrams. Other things we did within TOE, within the 8.5, and this is just in TOE itself, quite a few bug fixes. These are big bug fixes, many of them. Some of them are RPG only, some of them are COBOL only, some affect both of those. This second one down, suffer record number, increased we were having, as we've had customers who've been using TUI for many years and they have huge models, some of them discovered that maybe they need to page down 65 times on a screen to get to where they want. And we had some of them saying, look, I paged down or tried to page down 68 times on this screen and the model crashed. And of course, my initial thought was, why would you ever want to page down 68 times? Why not just, position to where you want to go? But they did. So we've now increased this, and now you would have to page down about 400 times before you got any kind of model crash. We standardized lots of bits of processing throughout the model. The third one from the bottom there, large model space areas. Again, we now have a number of customers who have huge models. TUI has always allowed multiple user spaces, but we're now getting customers who are having 3 or 4 user spaces and who are hitting some kinds of bugs to do with the actual hard limit that IDMI allows. There's still a 16 megabyte limit for a number of things within the operating system, and we're having customers who are hitting these because they have huge models that have been around for years. So we fixed lots of those. We fixed some web service bugs. I mean, the web service functionality came out in release 8.5, very powerful, but because that's the first release of it, there were a number of typically authority-related bugs that we fixed. And then within the trigger server, we made the trigger server functionality somewhat easier to use, so we added some enhancements to that. Now, obviously, when we bring out a release, it's not just TUI, it's the other bits of the TUI product family as well. The Toolkit, what I still call 1E, because it was the original thing, the official name is Toolkit, we added some compiled preprocessor enhancements. Back at 8.5, we totally changed the way that the compiled preprocessor works. That's all those Z-star lines, Z-star lines, and Y-star lines at the top. We made it much, much more powerful, and we added some more enhancements in release 8.6. For those of you that just use it for TUI, you may not notice any difference, but we use it obviously for all our handwritten programs as well. So we added that in. And this SPUDLU, Service Program Diagnostic Load Utility, as we're within the product, within bits of TUI and 1E and Web Option, as we're using service programs and things like that within our own product, we've added this utility to enable CA support to quickly see what service programs are being used, when those service programs are being activated, whether it's immediately or deferred, and as people, implement test fixes and PTFs over the course of the coming releases, then it'll enable CA support, or indeed you, to quickly say, oh, I'm using an outdated version of a service program in an old library. So it should pick up things like library list errors that customers sometimes have if they've got a number of different fixes or copies of objects in different libraries. Within Web Option, we made quite a lot of changes. We have a number of customers now who have thousands of users concurrently using Web Option, and some of the limitations we had on Web Option originally, for instance, a maximum number of server jobs used to be 30, we wiped out to 500, because if you have 3,000 people trying to access an IDMI of 400 using Web Option at once, that can be a bit of a bottleneck. So now they can all access that 400 over the internet with a web interface using sub-second screen transitions. We improved our auditing. We improved performance by not checking skeleton changes. We do a number of changes to the Regeneration markup language skeleton processing, the Regeneration processing, to continuously flush memory to ensure you're using the latest values. And then the last two there, again, we're using the SPUDLU thing for Web Option. And as test fixes become available, we've changed the processing in Web Option to more easily allow different test fix libraries, different test PTFs to be implemented at the same time and to avoid clashes between them. That's basically 8.6. Obviously, there'll be some questions. The top point here is, or both these points I think are actually very important. Less of an only CPU, but for us, we have a nice new big development IBM i. It's a big, powerful, powerful machine. We went from one where we were using up about 85% of all the disk. We now only use about 10%. It's much faster. Now, if you want to create a new model, you run the Y-Cut model live, and it takes about 6 seconds to create a new model. This is much, much better than the old way. We're now, of course, no longer using this machine with other teams at CA. CA does have a number of IBM i, AS400 type products that it does, and we used to share our development machine with them, and we now don't need to share. But it's that last line that I think is most important. The fact is that every so often, some of our customers are like, well, you know, CA, does CA really like 2E? You know, is it really that important? This big machine wasn't cheap. You know, CA has this big machine, and I think you, the customer base, should take this as being an indicator that CA has a commitment to 2E. They've spent a lot of money getting this big new machine for us, and this, to me, certainly, this made us as a development team very happy, not just because we got a new machine, but we're like, okay, you know, CA is putting time and money and resources into the 2E product, the 2E product family. Right now, we're looking at tentatively a release in late next year for the next release, which will also be developed using Agile. And so, as I say, any of you who would like to get involved in the new release and how it's going to work, please contact Paddy. We're always looking for new customers who want to get involved in our alpha programs, beta programs. It's the best way to get your voice heard over and above recommending ideas and voting for ideas. And another bit that we have now got more people in the 2E development team. We've added some people in our India office to do QA for 2E. So again, 2E has more people, we have more resources, and we're looking at more releases. I mean, right now, and this is by no means official, we're looking at our next release in late 2013. We're also looking at subsequent releases beyond that. We're looking now at least 2 releases out. Once the next release out, we'll look 2 releases beyond then. So as far as I'm concerned, 2E has a pretty big, bright future. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jody, who can ensure that we get questions from any of you, if any of you do have questions. I hope I haven't bored you with my continuous talking. Are there any questions?
Again, if you would like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Again, to ask a question is star 1.
At this point, I would play some background music, but I don't have any, I'm afraid.
There are no questions, sir, at this time.
There are no questions. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the show. If you have any questions about the release, then obviously you can contact either myself or Paddy Bowman, patricia.bowman@ca.com. And then also I suggest that you all go to the CA forums, where you can have a look at the CA community, where you can go onto the message boards. You can, as I say, you can have a look at the presentations on the new Release 8.6 functionality. You can go through it in your own time and try and build your own processing, and you can ask questions and add input. I'd like to say thank you all very much for taking the time to come along, and we really appreciate what you as a community do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.